The wedding hall sparkled with golden lights, crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, and flowers arranged so beautifully that it seemed like a dream. Guests in bright, elegant clothes laughed and chatted, taking photos and sharing greetings. Everyone seemed happy, excited, and busy with their own conversations, but in the midst of all this joy, Monique stepped into the hall, her heart beating fast with a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had been invited by David, the groom, a man she had known for years, someone who had been a very important part of her life, but the moment she entered, she immediately felt the sharp eyes on her, not the warm, friendly looks one expects at a wedding, but cold, judging stares, whispers that seemed to travel through the hall like small waves. Everyone looked at her as if she didn't belong, as if her presence was something unusual, something to avoid. Monique tried to keep her head high, walking with poise and grace, her dress flowing softly around her, her hands clutched a small clutch bag tightly, but her expression was calm, her lips slightly curved into a polite smile, trying to hide the anxiety bubbling inside. She noticed the way some guests subtly moved away from her, stepping back just a little to keep distance. Some whispered to each other, and when she glanced at them, they quickly looked away, pretending they hadn't been talking. The tension in the air was heavy, a mix of excitement for the wedding and quiet judgment aimed at her. Monique felt a pinch of sadness, remembering that she had hoped this day would be full of happiness and friendship, not cold shoulders and hushed conversations. As she walked further, she saw groups forming, people standing in circles laughing together, sharing inside jokes and greetings, but no one made any effort to include her. It was like invisible walls separated her from the crowd. She tried to remind herself why she was here, why she had come. David had invited her, and he mattered more than the whispers or judgment around her. She had been by his side during his difficult times, and he had always been someone who believed in her. She took a deep breath and moved forward, noticing the careful decorations, the bright flowers, and the elegant table arrangements, but all of it felt distant compared to the eyes on her. The music started, soft and beautiful, filling the hall with warmth. Yet it seemed like Monique was in a bubble of silence, separate from everyone else. She looked around for a friendly face, anyone who would smile at her, even a nod, but for now, no one did. She remembered her own life, the struggles she had overcome, the hard work, and the courage it took to keep going despite the judgment and prejudice she sometimes faced. That thought gave her a little strength, reminding her that she had survived worse, and this day, she would survive too. She found a seat at the back, quietly placing her bag beside her, and tried to make herself comfortable. Noticing the soft murmur of conversations around her, she realized she had to be patient. The ceremony hadn't started yet, and she needed to wait. Monique's mind wandered to the memories she had shared with David, their friendship, their laughter, and the promises of always being there for each other. She knew that this bond was invisible to others in the hall, but it was real, powerful, and unshakable. That thought made her shoulders relax a little, and a small smile appeared on her lips. She adjusted her dress and sat with dignity, refusing to let the whispers and stares take away her peace. As more guests arrived, she noticed some of them giving her quick, curious glances, some whispering to each other, and others pretending not to notice. Monique realized that people often fear what they do not understand, and today, she had to face that fear with courage. The wait seemed long, but she reminded herself that the real story would unfold soon, and her patience and strength would matter more than the judgment of strangers. She glanced at the flowers, the lights, and the beautiful decorations one more time, taking in the details, trying to calm her racing heart. The soft music continued, and she felt a small sense of hope, knowing that even if everyone ignored her now, the moment that truly mattered, the one that would change everything, was coming soon. Monique straightened her back, held her head high, and prepared herself to face the rest of the wedding with grace, strength, and quiet confidence. For now, she would wait, watching, observing, and knowing that her story was not over yet. The arrival had just begun, and the world around her was about to be surprised in ways she could not yet imagine. Monique sat quietly at the back of the hall, her hands folded gently in her lap, trying to focus on the soft music and the laughter of other guests, but she could not ignore the whispers that floated through the air like tiny arrows aimed at her heart. Every time someone passed by, she could feel their eyes lingering just a moment too long, measuring her, judging her, as if her presence was a mistake. She watched groups of people chatting, smiling, and taking photos together, while she remained On the edge, unnoticed and uninvited, it stung, but Monique reminded herself that she had been through worse in her life, that she had learned how to carry herself with dignity even when others chose to be cruel. Yet, the coldness of this room, the quiet avoidance, felt heavier than she expected. It was more than just avoidance, it was rejection, subtle but sharp, making her wonder if anyone here truly saw her as a person, not just a black woman at a wedding, but someone with feelings, memories, and a story. She took a deep breath and tried to distract herself by observing the decorations, the tables dressed with fine linen, the sparkling glasses, and the arrangements of roses and lilies, but her eyes kept wandering back to the guests, noting the tiny gestures of exclusion, the way a chair would be pulled slightly away when she approached, the way conversations would pause when she walked near. She even overheard a few murmurs, people questioning why she was invited, what connection she had to the groom. It hurt, yes, but it also made her more determined to stay. She had a purpose here, and no one's judgment could take that away. As she sat, she remembered the days she and David had spent together, the laughter, the support, the moments when he had trusted her with his secrets and dreams. She realized that the opinions of strangers could never change the bond they shared. That thought brought her a sense of calm, but it did not make the present any easier. A woman passed by and barely glanced at her, muttering something under her breath, and Monique could feel the sting. Yet instead of reacting, she kept her head high, meeting no one's gaze, and simply allowed herself to breathe through the discomfort. At that moment, a young child ran past her, almost bumping into her dress, and the child's mother immediately grabbed him, whispering a small apology. The brief recognition of her presence felt like a small ray of light, reminding Monique that not everyone here was cruel or unkind. She thought about how often she had been judged in her life, how many times people had assumed things about her without knowing her story, and she felt a quiet strength building inside. It was this strength that allowed her to sit with grace, even while feeling invisible. Hours seemed to pass slowly as the ceremony preparations continued. Guests continued to mingle, some glancing her way with curiosity, others pretending not to notice. Monique noticed the way some people whispered behind their hands, their eyes darting toward her, wondering what the groom saw in her. But she didn't flinch. She knew that what mattered was not the gossip of strangers, but the connection she shared with David, the moments that had built a lifetime of trust and understanding. As the music softened and the ceremony was about to begin, Monique felt her heart beat faster, anticipating what was coming. She straightened her back, smoothed her dress, and adjusted her hair, making herself ready for the moment when she would no longer be just a background figure, when the groom's eyes would find her, and the story she had carried quietly would finally be seen. In that moment, she allowed herself a small smile, a glimmer of hope that soon, things would change, that her presence, her importance, and her worth would be recognized, not because she demanded it, but because she had always earned it. Monique's hands rested gently on her lap again, her eyes focused on the front of the hall. As she waited patiently, her heart steady despite the tension around her, for now, the whispers, the cold stares, and the avoidance could not reach her. She had found a quiet courage within herself, and she knew that the moment of recognition was coming, and when it did, everything would be different. As Monique sat quietly at the back, her mind wandered to memories she had long kept close, memories that no one in this hall could ever understand. She remembered the first time she had met David, back when they were children, running barefoot through dusty streets, laughing at silly games, and sharing secrets that only they could understand. Their friendship had grown over the years, built on trust, loyalty, and countless small acts of kindness. Monique had been there for David when life was harsh, offering support when his family struggled, standing by him when others walked away, and sometimes quietly sacrificing her own comfort to make his days easier. Those years had created a bond stronger than words, a connection invisible to strangers but undeniable to them. She smiled softly at a memory of a rainy afternoon when David had missed the bus and she had run to bring him home, soaking wet but laughing all the way. That memory reminded her why she was here today, why this wedding mattered not just to the couple, but to the history she shared with David. The whispers and stares around her suddenly felt small compared to the depth of their bond. She realized that while the crowd judged her based on appearances, David knew her heart, her courage, and her worth, and that knowledge gave her a quiet confidence, a fire that would not be extinguished by cold looks. As she looked around the hall again, she noticed the subtle ways people continued to exclude her, but she knew longer felt the same sting. She had her own story, her own strength, and she knew it would matter soon. Monique recalled another moment from the past, when David had faced a serious challenge at school, being blamed unfairly for something he had not done. Everyone else had ignored him, but she had stayed, defending him, explaining the truth, and helping him clear his name. That act of loyalty had cemented their friendship in a way that no one in the hall could understand. It was a secret history of trust and love, a history that gave Monique a sense of pride and purpose. As she thought about it, she realized that today, the same story would unfold, but in a very different way. Instead of defending him from outsiders, she would witness how he recognized her in front of everyone, how he would honor her presence in a way that would silence the whispers and turn judgment into awe. The thought made her pulse quicken with anticipation. Her eyes scanned the room, noticing small details she had missed before, the way the light reflected on the crystal glasses, the soft folds of the tablecloths, and the careful arrangement of flowers. Every detail seemed sharper, clearer, as if the world itself was waiting for the moment when the past and present would collide. She thought of the hours she had spent preparing for this day, choosing her dress, deciding how to wear her hair, and quietly convincing herself that her presence mattered. It was a delicate balance between humility and pride, knowing that she deserved to be here, but also trusting that David's recognition would make it unforgettable. As the music softened, signaling that the ceremony would begin soon, Monique felt a gentle thrill run through her. She remembered the times David had smiled at her secretly, the small glances that said more than words ever could, and she felt that same warmth now. Her nerves mingled with hope, creating a strange but powerful feeling inside her. The hall seemed larger now, filled with people who still did not understand her, but none of that mattered. She had her own history with David, one that could not be erased by judgment or prejudice. Monique adjusted her posture, sat a little taller, and let her eyes rest on the front of the hall, knowing that very soon, her name would be spoken, and the story she had quietly carried for years would finally be recognized. And when that moment came, she knew everything around her would change forever. The hall grew quieter as the ceremony was about to begin, soft music filling the air, mingling with the low murmur of guests finding their seats. Monique's heart beat faster, not with fear, but with anticipation. She adjusted her dress and smoothed her hair, taking a moment to remind herself that she had been through much harder days. This was only a wedding. Yet the weight of the stares and whispers around her made it feel heavier than she expected. As the bridesmaids appeared, walking gracefully down the aisle, the crowd's attention shifted, leaving Monique to watch quietly from her seat. She noticed the way some guests leaned in to greet each other, laughing softly, while others glanced at her with curiosity or thinly veiled judgment. Her presence seemed like an unspoken question they couldn't answer, but Monique refused to let it disturb her. She thought about the bond she shared with David, how they had been there for each other in ways that no one else could understand. That bond gave her a sense of calm, a feeling that no one's opinion here could define her worth. As the ceremony began, the officiant spoke softly, welcoming everyone, the words flowing over Monique like a gentle wave. She observed the couple taking their places, the groom's hands slightly trembling as he looked around the hall. Yet, despite the nerves and excitement, his eyes held something steady, something that only she could understand. Monique's gaze found David for a brief moment, and even from a distance, she felt the silent acknowledgement between them, a small nod of reassurance that everything would be okay. The bridesmaids continued their walk, the petals falling gently, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. The whispers had quieted, replaced by the soft hum of curiosity and expectation. Monique's chest swelled slightly, realizing that the moment was drawing near. It wasn't just about her presence. It was about recognition, about being seen for who she truly was, not what the crowd assumed. She thought of all the times she had felt invisible, overlooked, or dismissed in her life, and she felt a spark of determination. This time, she would not fade into the background. She adjusted her posture, sat up a little straighter, and allowed herself to be fully present. The officiant began asking the couple to exchange vows, their voices calm yet filled with emotion. Monique watched as David's expression softened, his eyes scanning the room briefly before settling. Somewhere near the back, she felt her pulse quicken, sensing that he was about to do something unexpected, something that would shift the entire energy of the hall. The guests remained unaware, caught in the flow of the ceremony, some fidgeting in their seats, others whispering quietly, completely oblivious to the significance of what was about to happen. Monique's mind drifted back to the moments she had shared with David over the years, the laughter, the secrets, and the support. Each memory seemed to gather strength inside her, creating a shield of confidence that no judgment could pierce. She realized that what mattered most was not the opinions of the crowd, but the bond that had been tested and proven over time. As the groom cleared his throat, preparing to speak, Monique felt her breath catch. She knew that this was the turning point, the moment when everything could change. All the whispers, stares, and doubts would vanish if David chose to recognize her publicly. The hall seemed to hold its breath, the soft lighting casting gentle shadows, the flowers glowing under the chandeliers. Monique's hands rested lightly on her lap, her fingers intertwined. Her mind was calm, yet inside, excitement buzzed. She knew that soon, the story of her importance, the years of loyalty and love shared with David, would be revealed in front of everyone, and when that moment came, the room would never look the same again. The ceremony continued, each word spoken by the officiant building the tension, the music rising and falling like gentle waves. Monique's eyes never left David, waiting for the second when he would speak her name, and the world around her would finally change. She straightened her back one last time, took a deep breath, and prepared herself for the moment she had been quietly waiting for, the moment when patience, courage, and the strength of true friendship would turn whispers into awe, and loneliness into recognition. The officiant's voice seemed to fade into the background as David took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room. His gaze stopped for a brief moment at the back where Monique sat, and something shifted in the atmosphere. The whispers that had floated through the hall, the judgments, and the stares, all of it seemed to pause, as if time itself was holding its breath. Monique felt it too, a tingling in her chest, a quiet awareness that something extraordinary was about to happen. David cleared his throat, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He began to speak about the journey he had taken to this day, the people who mattered most in his life, and the support he had received along the way. The guests listened politely, some glancing around the room, others focused on the couple, but no one expected what came next. Then, David paused, and his gaze found Monique completely. He smiled softly, the kind of smile that carried memories, gratitude, and unspoken words. He spoke her name aloud, clearly, proudly. Monique. The sound of her name echoed through the hall, and for a moment, there was complete silence. The crowd stiffened, some shifting in their seats, confused, others whispering nervously to each other, but Monique could hardly breathe, her eyes wide, tears forming as the recognition finally arrived. David began to speak about her, about how she had shaped his life, how her kindness, courage, and loyalty had guided him in ways no one else could. The guests were stunned, the cold stares replaced by a mixture of surprise, shame, and awe. They had ignored her, dismissed her, and yet here she was being celebrated publicly, in front of everyone. Her heart swelled, and she felt a mixture of joy, relief, and validation that she had waited for all these years. Monique's hands trembled slightly as she stood, slowly making her way down the aisle. The hall seemed to part for her, the weight of exclusion lifting with each step. Guests whispered quietly, some looking embarrassed, others watching in silent admiration. David reached out as she approached, his hands steady, and they shared a brief, meaningful glance, a glance that said everything words could not, that acknowledged their history, their bond, and the unspoken understanding between them. When she finally stood beside him, the crowd could see the strength, the grace, and the dignity she carried. David continued, praising her presence in his life, the sacrifices she had made, the moments she had been there when no one else was. His words painted a picture of her character, her courage, and the unwavering support she had given. The whispers began to change, turning into murmurs of admiration, a few hesitant claps breaking the silence. Monique felt tears roll down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness, they were tears of triumph, acknowledgement, and the fulfillment of patience. The atmosphere in the hall shifted completely. The same people who had shunned her now looked at her with respect. Some even approached, offering apologies and smiles, recognizing, finally, the person they had overlooked. Monique stood tall, her head high, allowing the moment to sink in. She didn't need to demand recognition. It had come naturally, honestly, and powerfully. David squeezed her hand gently, and together they shared a quiet, victorious smile, a smile that said, despite the whispers, despite the judgment, the truth had always been visible to those who truly mattered. Monique's journey from isolation to recognition became the heart of the ceremony, leaving everyone in the hall transformed. The bride and other guests watched with awe as the woman they had ignored was celebrated not with words alone, but with history, loyalty, and undeniable presence. The music rose softly, gentle and celebratory, wrapping the moment in warmth. Monique looked around at the crowd, noticing the change in their eyes. Some were thoughtful, some quietly apologetic, and others simply amazed. But she didn't focus on them, she focused on David, on the bond that had never faltered, on the acknowledgement she had waited for, and on the power of truth and patience to overcome judgment. As the ceremony continued, the whispers and stares no longer mattered. Monique had been seen, her value recognized, and the moment would remain in everyone's memory long after the day was over. It was more than a wedding. It was a celebration of courage, friendship, and the undeniable impact one person could have on another. The hall was filled with a new energy, a change so sudden it was almost tangible. The whispers that had once aimed like small arrows now faded into quiet murmurs of surprise and admiration. Guests who had ignored Monique only moments ago now looked at her differently, some with hesitation, others with genuine respect. She stood tall beside David, her chest swelling with a quiet pride. The woman they had shunned was now being celebrated for the person she truly was, and the transformation in the room was remarkable. Some guests approached, awkward at first, offering small apologies, smiles that were tentative but sincere. Monique received them gracefully, her demeanor calm and composed. She didn't need to dwell on the past coldness. The recognition she had received in that moment was enough. Her eyes scanned the hall and she saw expressions change before her very eyes. People who had whispered and judged were now nodding, their faces softened by understanding. Even the bride, who had initially been distant, looked at Monique with curiosity and newfound respect. Monique felt a warmth spread through her, not from the attention itself, but from the realization that courage and patience could indeed transform perceptions. David squeezed her hand gently, his own pride and gratitude evident in his smile. "I wanted everyone to know," he said quietly, as if speaking only to her, "that you've always mattered to me." That simple acknowledgement held years of history, loyalty, and unspoken promises, and Monique felt her heart swell with emotion. She realized that her journey through exclusion had been worth it, not just for recognition, but for the validation of a bond that no one could take away. As more guests gathered around, the atmosphere began to lighten, laughter returned, soft conversations resumed, and the tension that had filled the room moments ago was replaced by a sense of celebration. Monique found herself being included in discussions, people asking about her life, her experiences, and her connection with David. It was as if the recognition had opened doors that had been closed for too long. She shared a few stories quietly, smiling as some guests listened with genuine interest. For the first time that evening, Monique felt completely at ease. The fear of judgment and exclusion no longer weighed her down. Instead, she felt empowered, understood, and accepted. Even those who had initially avoided her began to see the depth of her character. Realizing that appearances had misled them, Monique noticed a few guests exchanging looks, silently acknowledging that they had been wrong. That small, unspoken shift was perhaps more satisfying than any words could have been. She walked across the hall with grace, exchanging a few polite greetings, each interaction reinforcing her sense of belonging. The music shifted to a livelier tune, signaling that the ceremony had moved into the celebration phase. Monique felt herself relaxing further, allowing herself to enjoy the moment. The groom joined her at the center of the hall, smiling broadly, and together they shared a laugh that carried a history only they could understand. The crowd watched, some clapping gently, some cheering softly. The room seemed alive with admiration for the woman who had been invisible moments before. Children ran past, laughing, and even they seemed to sense the change, glancing curiously at Monique and pointing. Their innocence mirrored the purity of the moment, showing that recognition and kindness could inspire even the youngest hearts. Monique's gaze returned to David, and she saw that his eyes reflected not only pride but also gratitude. He had shared a truth that no one else had known, bringing her story into the light, and in doing so, he had changed the energy of the room forever. She realized then that true recognition was not about demanding respect, but about being acknowledged by those who truly mattered. The rest of the guests could follow, and they did, slowly and naturally. Monique allowed herself to smile fully, enjoying the warmth of connection. the joy of being seen, and the relief that the silence of exclusion had been broken. As the celebration continued around her, she felt a quiet sense of triumph, a feeling that lingered even as music, laughter, and conversation filled the room. In that moment, she understood that courage, patience, and unwavering faith in the bonds that mattered could turn judgment into admiration, exclusion into inclusion, and whispers of doubt into applause of respect. Monique stood tall, confident, and serene, knowing that this moment would remain etched in her memory, not just as a wedding, but as a celebration of human dignity, loyalty, and the power of acknowledgement. The wedding hall was alive with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. The air had completely transformed from tense whispers and cold stares to warmth, curiosity, and celebration. Monique walked through the crowd with calm confidence, her head held high. Every step she took seemed lighter now, as if the recognition she had received had lifted a weight from her shoulders. Guests approached her, some hesitantly, others openly smiling. Sharing kind words and greetings, she responded with grace, accepting their apologies, and allowing herself to enjoy the attention she had quietly earned. Children tugged at their parents to come meet her, fascinated by the stories they had overheard, and even the youngest seemed to sense the power of the moment. Monique smiled down at them, feeling a deep sense of peace. She realized that this celebration was no longer just about the wedding, but about transformation, about the way one person's courage and dignity could change the hearts of many. David stayed close by her side, proud and calm, watching as the crowd's energy shifted. He could see the respect and admiration growing around them, and a quiet pride swelled in his chest. The couple shared small, meaningful gestures, a smile, a nod, and laughter that carried the years of friendship, trust, and loyalty they had built together. The bride approached, her expression softened by understanding. She offered Monique a hand and a gentle smile. "I'm glad you're here," she said quietly. The words, simple as they were, carried a depth that made Monique's heart warm. Even those who had been most judgmental earlier now seemed reflective. Some approached to shake hands, others simply nodded in quiet acknowledgement. It was a transformation born not of force, but of witnessing truth and integrity. Monique felt herself relaxing fully for the first time that evening. The soft music played, guiding people toward the dance floor, and the laughter of friends and family filled every corner of the hall. She noticed conversations starting to include her, stories being shared, questions asked about her life and experiences. People were genuinely interested now, not out of obligation, but out of respect and curiosity. Monique laughed softly at a humorous anecdote shared by one of the guests. The sound of her joy spread through the crowd, like a ripple turning tension into lightness. As the evening continued, she found herself surrounded by small groups, people listening intently as she spoke, sharing her thoughts and memories. Each interaction reinforced the sense that her presence was valued, not questioned. The music grew livelier, and soon, the first dances began, couples swaying in rhythm, friends laughing as they twirled on the floor. Monique watched, feeling a quiet contentment. She realized that tonight was not just a wedding, but a celebration of human connection, resilience, and the power of acknowledgement. David gestured for her to join him, and together they moved to the center, joining in the dance. The guests cheered softly, some joining in, the hall filled with warmth and joy. Monique's heart felt full, not from attention alone, but from the knowledge that her strength, patience, and dignity had transformed the energy of the room. Even those who had judged her earlier now seemed inspired, learning that respect and recognition cannot be demanded but earned through honesty, courage, and quiet perseverance. The evening carried on, with stories shared, laughter echoing, and the bond between Monique and David celebrated not just by the couple, but by everyone present. She realized that the small gestures of kindness from the groom had sparked a wave of change, reminding everyone that human connections are powerful, and recognition can heal wounds long ignored. Monique looked around at the crowd, seeing familiar faces softened by understanding, others quietly admiring her courage. The experience filled her with a sense of accomplishment and peace. She had endured the stares, the whispers, and the judgment, and now she stood in a space where her worth was celebrated openly. Finally, as the evening wound down, Monique shared one last glance with David, both of them smiling knowingly. A silent understanding passed between them, that this moment, this night, had changed more than just a wedding. It had changed hearts, perceptions, and perhaps even lives. The wedding hall was finally settling into a gentle rhythm, the music softer now, the laughter quieting into conversations filled with warmth and reflection. Monique sat at her table, a glass of sparkling juice in hand, watching the room with a sense of calm and fulfillment. She had entered the hall earlier with a mixture of nervousness and hope, unsure of how she would be received, but now, every glance, every smile, and every gesture told her that her presence had been acknowledged. She thought back to the cold stares, the whispers, and the subtle exclusion she had felt upon arrival, and she marveled at how completely the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't just recognition, it was transformation, a reminder that patience, courage, and integrity could quietly influence even the most skeptical hearts. Guests walked past her, some still offering kind words and gentle apologies, while others shared stories, now including her in the conversation. Each interaction reinforced the idea that one person's dignity could ripple outward, touching lives and changing perceptions. David approached, his smile warm and genuine. "I'm glad you're here," he said, echoing words he had spoken earlier during the ceremony, but this time, there was no formality, no anticipation, just truth and gratitude. Monique returned his smile, feeling a deep sense of connection and understanding. She realized that what mattered most was not the applause, the attention, or the sudden admiration of the crowd, but the bond she shared with him, a bond that had always been real and unshakable. The bride came to sit beside her, offering a small gift and a soft smile. "Thank you for being here," she said quietly. The words carried sincerity, and Monique felt her heart lighten even further. Even those who had avoided her now seemed thoughtful, reflecting on their own assumptions and the quiet courage it took for her to remain composed. As the evening continued, Monique wandered through the hall, exchanging greetings, sharing laughter, and listening to stories. She realized that recognition was not about demanding it, but allowing one's true self to shine, and that authenticity could inspire change. Children ran around, their energy infectious, reminding everyone of innocence and the simple joy of connection. Monique laughed softly as a little boy tugged at her dress, asking a question, and she knelt to answer him with patience and warmth. She noticed the older guests nodding in approval, their expressions softened, a silent acknowledgement of her poise and dignity. The music swelled once more, and couples took to the floor, dancing and celebrating the union of love. For Monique, it wasn't just about the wedding dance, but about the dance of acceptance, patience, and courage that had carried her through the evening. David joined her again, and they shared a quiet moment, watching the guests, seeing the change in their eyes. It was a subtle but powerful victory. The whispers and judgment had been replaced by respect, understanding, and warmth. Monique realized that moments like this didn't just celebrate the couple, they celebrated human resilience, the power of recognition, and the quiet strength that one person could bring into the lives of many. She reflected on her own journey, the years of loyalty and friendship she had shared with David, the times she had stood by him, and the moments she had been overlooked by others. Each memory now felt honored, validated, and meaningful. The evening began to wind down, guests saying their goodbyes, hugs and handshakes exchanged, but the impact lingered in the air. Monique felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she had faced judgment with dignity, and had emerged not only recognized, but celebrated. She looked around one last time at the hall, the lights soft, the flowers glowing in the gentle light, and she smiled quietly to herself, understanding that the story of her courage and presence would be remembered long after the day ended. David approached, offering his arm, and together they stepped toward the exit. The night outside was calm, the stars twinkling softly, and Monique felt a sense of completion, of fulfillment, and of quiet triumph. She knew that this day had changed not just how others saw her, but how she saw herself, stronger, braver, and undeniably worthy. As they walked into the night, hand in hand, Monique felt the satisfaction of having stayed true to herself. The whispers and judgment were left behind in the hall, replaced by acknowledgement, respect, and the beauty of human connection. And in that moment, she understood that courage, patience, and unwavering dignity could transform hearts, minds, and even the world around her, leaving a story that would inspire long after the wedding lights dimmed.